Today's interview on Brighteon.com features Dane Wigington from Geoengineering Watch.org. And Dane Wigington is one of our favorite guests, and our fans also love his material, even though he scares everybody with the truth about what's going on with weather weaponization and now crop failures. And I'm a big fan of Dane. I've got his shirt right here, the Geoengineering Watch shirt right there. Yeah. See that? Geoengineeringwatch.org. Thanks for sending that, Dane. And welcome to the show today. It's great to have you on.
Deepest gratitude to you, Mike, for all you've done to pull back the curtain and expose the insanity behind it. And with what's happening in our skies, imperative that populations understand the gravity of the threat it poses to all of us. It's not just weather warfare, but also biological warfare because of the toxic elements that are a part of these programs. So again, as you correctly stated, they're targeting not only food supplies, but the air column is being contaminated. We're all breathing it. This is a multi-leveled threat.
So let's start with the more recent news. Every day, of course, I'm assigning stories to my writers, and I'm doing my own broadcast, and I'm seeing crop failures across the Midwest, wheat crops just being devastated by the current drought conditions. And then, of course, in other places around the world, floods and storms and so on. Let's just start with the basics. What we're seeing right now across the Midwest, this is not normal for this area and this time of year, is it?
No, I would cite that nothing's normal anymore in respect to weather and climate systems. And Mike, perhaps you saw that the White House released late last week their statement that they were studying the injection of aerosols into the sky to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy, as if it hasn't been going on for 75 plus years already. And that is indicative of the insane asylum that we live in, that they can pretend that they might geoengineer someday if things get bad enough, as if it's not bad enough already, as if they're not conducting weather warfare already, and again have been for 75 plus years. What we desperately need is for populations to wake up, look up, and understand that we're in a very real fight for life right now.
And I'm glad you brought this point up because, it was big news. It was covered by the mainstream media all over the world, including in the UK Daily Mail, that the White House is reviewing a plan to block the sun. And they even called it geoengineering in the headlines that I saw. And yet 5 years ago, they said it was all a conspiracy. There's no such thing. It's not happening. So, Dane, what do you think changed where they're now admitting that geoengineering is a good thing in their view? It was a conspiracy theory. Now it's a good policy to save the planet, according to them. What do you think?
It's called putting lipstick on the pig and hoping the public will accept it. And this is, at this point, they are desperate because this elephant in the sky is becoming all but impossible to hide. They're wreaking havoc around the globe. Other countries are waking up to this as well, that their governments have been participating either actively or passively in these programs, being strong-armed by the larger powers to participate. And the very premise for these programs, Mike, and this is imperative for populations to understand, the very foundation in which these programs are pushed on populations is that they mimic the temporary cooling effect of volcanic eruptions. But we now know from the latest and most up-to-date data that even volcanic eruptions only provide very temporary toxic cooling. And this is far more toxic still because we're talking about aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, graphene. After that temporary cooling period, these types of operations to saturate the sky with these light scattering particles not only destroy photosynthesis, the ozone layer, contaminate everything, but it causes a worsened, much worse overall long-term warming. Why would that be a surprise? And anybody who, for example, in the case of the ozone layer disintegration alone, which is by itself an existential threat, anybody that fills the surfaces of cars or how fast the interiors, have you noticed that, Mike, how fast the interiors of cars heat up now? That is incredibly penetrating thermal energy because of the destruction of the ozone layer. Again, that factor, primary cause, climate engineering, not hairspray cans.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you brought that up. But I did want to show my screen here for those who are skeptical of what you and I are talking about, Dane. So here it is from the UK Daily Mail. More gloomy news from Biden. White House says it's open to plan that would block sunlight from hitting surface of the earth in a bid to limit global warming. Now, I believe this headline has been altered because I thought I saw geoengineering in the original headline, but they do have it in the subhead. The White House has opened the door to an audacious geoengineering plan. So here it is in the mainstream media, and this is dated July 1st, 2023. So it's recent. And then the UK Daily Mail, to their credit, they say that scientists have warned the practice could have devastating effects. And that's part of what you were just talking about there, Dane. You know, this is, I call it terraforming also as well. You know, it's geoengineering, but they're altering planetary chemistry, which can have devastating effects across the entire biosphere, as you have been warning about for so many years. Your thoughts?
Been trying to warn at the top of my lungs for, yes, over 15 years, and that damage is manifesting catastrophically right now. And when they refer to, if they deploy this, it might have devastating consequences, we are already there, long since been there. And you can't just turn this off. They've committed us all to an experiment from which there is no return without public knowledge or consent. And again, the total consequences of these programs can scarcely be comprehended or quantified. Not only contaminating every breath we take, they're the core causal factor for the fires, Mike. We see they're already telling us, they're programming populations to accept that the Canadian fires are going to burn all year long.
Really?
And that is a part that absolutely are. They're already warning us, expect those fires to burn until the winter snows come. How do they know that? Because that is a part of the plan. That is a part of the agenda. Wildfires serve geoengineering agenda. Please, if your listeners, just search that title, one of our most important reports that has scientific study in it that advocates for the intentional incineration of northern latitude forests to put enough particulate matter into the sky to provide temporary cooling. That is true desperation, to incinerate the planet's last remaining life support systems, to mask the severity of damage done to the planet already, so much of it from climate engineering. And think about that insanity. Let's do more of what we've been doing to try to mask the damage done from what we've been doing. Is that not insane? If I could, before I toss this back, let me add one more layer of insanity. It appears in the case of the ozone layer and the methane buildup that's happening in the atmosphere, and not methane from cow flatulence. This is methane from thawing methane hydrate and clathrate releases that are happening in Arctic tundra and on the seafloor, which climate engineering is making far worse, not better. We have Project Lucy, that's an acronym. Project Alamo, that's an acronym for microwaving the atmosphere with opposing frequencies in an incredibly desperate and dangerous attempt to try to molecularly degrade the methane. What are the consequences from those programs on top of everything else, layer upon layer of insanity, Mike? Just like you know so well, more than almost anyone on the planet, or you are certainly top in your field in this, that the pharmaceutical industrial approach, take this pharmaceutical for that symptom, and then 10 other pharmaceuticals for the consequences of the side effects of that, 10 more for, it just never, it doesn't end. It's a cascading collapse scenario, and that's what we face.
We're living in a kill zone. I'm convinced that humanity has been labeled for extermination on a planetary scale. I don't think they're going to completely succeed, but I think they will kill 1 to 2 billion human beings before these extermination attempts are halted. Those deaths have already begun, and sadly, the famine and food supply problems caused by geoengineering could kill even more than 1 to 2 billion people. You know, everybody has to eat, and there's, you know, if you cut off half the world's food supply, then you kill 4 billion people, by the way. And that can be done with this climate engineering that's taking place. So the only question in my mind, Dane, is how many deaths can we limit this to, right? I mean, the deaths are already happening, and you know the mechanisms as well as I. Can we save half of humanity? Can we have 4 billion people left by the end of this? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that number would be very optimistic. And I know that that's a difficult pill to swallow. And we at geoengineeringwatch.org, as you know, we fully acknowledge that we have damaged the planet in countless ways. We've been very poor stewards of the planet. No arguing that. But for any environmental group, the Al Gores of the world and the rest of them, for them to pretend that they care about the environment while systematically ignoring, denying, and trying to marginalize this massive, biggest single part of the equation that's wreaking havoc on the planet's remaining life support systems, derailing them, preventing them from responding to the damage already done. That is a criminal act, Mike.
Yes.
Every single environmental group, every so-called climate scientist that's denying this, pretending it's just a proposal we could, might do someday, that is absolutely inexcusable. And if we can wake the populations up to this criminal denial across the board, one can only imagine they would take to the streets with their proverbial pitchforks and torches. And that time needs to come fast, because the planet is unable to respond to the damage done because of these programs, which are not benevolent in any way, shape, or form. This is weather warfare and biological warfare, period.
Yeah, good point. And I'm glad you brought up the Canadian wildfires. Let's talk about that for a minute, because the burning that has already taken place is mind-boggling. I don't know how many acres. Do you know how?
I do.
How many is it? Yeah, go ahead.
Since May 1st, Canada has lost, on average, 330,000 acres every single day.
Oh my
since
God.
May 1st. Well over 20 million acres and counting.
Oh my God.
Again, it's off the scale. And what most Americans don't know is Siberia burning just as horrifically. Americans have no idea that's occurring. And you have the superpowers, whatever their surface conflicts are, the whole Ukraine situation, they are absolutely colluding and cooperating on climate engineering. And we have Senate documents to prove this, some of them 800 pages long. So you have this behind the curtain collusion. They all have their own agendas. But on the climate engineering issue, Russia incinerating their forests in Siberia, the same as Canada's here. And it seems everybody takes their turn. And that's something that is difficult to ferret out and prove, of course. But you have one area burning one year, another area burning another year. California certainly has had its turn. And then suddenly, at the onset of last winter, when more drought was predicted, more drought was scheduled. I don't want to call it prediction, because this is simply the scheduled weather. And then, for reasons that we can speculate on, they changed the script, and they sent the snowmageddon into California, the toxic snowmageddon, which is not restoring forest here, Mike. The fir trees are dying every bit as fast and faster than before this toxic precipitation was allowed to fall, because that doesn't rejuvenate forests. As you know about soil microbiome and root systems. And when you're dumping toxic rain on those already damaged systems, you only do more damage. So the fir die-off here is faster than ever. In fact, it's so bad, when the fir tree is the predominant tree in the western forests, there's science reports out now called Firmageddon, indicating that the die-off of the fir trees is so cataclysmic.
The collapse of these multiple biospheres, even in the ocean as well, will have devastating consequences on the ability of human civilization to survive. I think people underestimate how much we depend on natural systems to function. For example, pollinators. Without pollinators, we starve. I mean, about a third of the food that we eat typically in any given meal comes from plants that require, pollination. And without that, first of all, California's agricultural industry would absolutely collapse. And I think that process is underway right now. Can I ask you a question about the Canadian wildfires again? I didn't quite finish that. By what mechanism is it your understanding that how are the fires being set or sustained? How do they start these fires?
That would be another subject besides the foundational factor of climate engineering, setting the stage for those fires to burn with such ferocity. That's what's prepping the forest in a way that allows it to burn with that kind of ferocity. Now, we looked at the satellite imagery of a lot of these startups. There were no disturbances. There were no convective storm cells above. There should have been no lightning there. They started almost simultaneously. It certainly looks like some sort of coordinated arson. The key factor here is what is set the template for these fires to burn. Geoengineeringwatch.org found a 140-page U.S. military document titled Forest Fires as a Military Weapon.
Wow.
There were about 18 sites named inside North America in that document. So why would they be studying sites for this type of forest preparation, which involves exactly what we're seeing, for preparation up to 2 years for some of these forests to dry them out, contaminate soils, cause this dead buildup of material, and then the forest can burn with immense ferocity, causing firestorms. It's exactly what we see. It's named in this military document. How much proof do we need that they are at this when we have peer-reviewed science study that's again in the short report titled Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda, one of our most important short reports, peer-reviewed science study advocating for incinerating northern latitude forests to provide temporary cooling. So, Mike, you remember when the fires first ignited, all this smoke drifted down over the U.S. Northeast, right?
Yep.
Temperatures dropped precipitously.
That's right.
About 25, 30 degrees. Now, it's counterintuitive for some people. They think, how can a wildfire create cooling? But when you're putting that much particulate matter into the atmosphere and blocking that much sunlight, you definitely can cool the surface temporarily. But at what cost to the planet? Destroying our remaining life support systems forever? And because trees aren't growing back, Mike, because the ozone layer is so damaged, soils are so compromised, and the precipitation cycle so disrupted, now the success rate for planting saplings in Northern California, and I know because I do this on the preserve that I manage, I did this, a success rate 15 years ago of 95% for the saplings making it through the first year. Success rate now is zero. Nothing makes it through the first year. And back to the food supplies, which you mentioned, it's not just crops collapsing. And again, climate engineering drying out the atmosphere, which is not only contaminating soils, but changing atmospheric RH, relative humidity. So we have vapor pressure deficit. The lack of humidity causes everything from crops to forests to shut their stomata, their respiratory ports. The organisms don't breathe. They don't absorb carbon. They don't release oxygen. They don't grow. We have that factor. The ozone layer destruction, releasing immense UV radiation on oceans, which is destroying plankton, bottom of the food chain on planet Earth. 90% decline in the Atlantic already, 90% globally, a 90% decline in pelagic fish populations as a food fish. And as you so correctly stated a moment ago, how many rely on that bounty from the sea? It's 2 to 3 billion as a primary source. And nature, as you also correctly said a moment ago, has historically provided 75% of all global GDP for free. Right. No more.
So we're talking about an economic collapse, of course, following the biosphere collapse that's being engineered. Now, I want to bring people's attention to photosynthesis here for a second, but first through global dimming. Now, you've done a lot of work about dimming, and I think you have a documentary on dimming on your website, geoengineeringwatch.org. I think I saw here it is. It's called The Dimming. So that's something that people need to watch right there. Dimming can happen from volcanoes, as I know you know this, Dane. I'm just repeating this for the audience. Volcanoes, and by the way, there's another volcano that just today I found out there's been 1,200 earthquakes, and there might be another volcano that's about to blow. We'll see, in the weeks ahead. But volcanoes eject enormous material, particulate matter, into the upper atmosphere, sometimes reaching the stratosphere. There's also, of course, the forest fires that you were just talking about, and that releases particulate matter, which causes dimming and cooling. And then in addition to that, there's stratospheric aerosol injection, which is admitted by the government, and this is part of the government's plan to cause dimming. But in each of these cases, the dimming, of course, blocks photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is essential. It's critical, obviously, for life on Earth, because that's what all plants use in order to have the energy to function, to grow and to produce crops and leaves and stems and roots and so on, and to synthesize the molecules that we call nutrition, by the way. How do you think vitamin C gets made by an orange? Well, it uses energy from the sun through photosynthesis, plus carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, plus water from its roots, to synthesize vitamin C, which is made of nothing but hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen in a certain configuration. That's all there is in vitamin C, is HCO. So, look up the molecule if you don't believe me. But without photosynthesis, doesn't this entire system, Dane, grind to a halt?
It does. It absolutely does. Photosynthesis, by the way, stops at 104 degrees Fahrenheit. It tapers down up to that point, stops completely at that point. Now let's add what you just mentioned so correctly, that the scattering of the light spectrum in the atmosphere, which is never mentioned on any geoengineering study of any sort. They don't mention what it does to photosynthesis. They don't mention, by the way, everything we spray in the sky is going to settle down through the air column. We all get to breathe it, where it contaminates virtually everything on the planet. None of that ever mentioned in so-called science studies from the so-called science community. So the bottom line, from every conceivable direction, they are decimating the planet's life support systems. And on the aspect of, again, with photosynthesis, vapor pressure deficit, destroyed soil microbiome, we know aluminum is very toxic to root systems. It causes them to shut down nutrient uptake. They die a slow, protracted death. And in the case of the samples we have taken, and we've taken hundreds, by the way, not just across the U.S., but around the world, we've taken about 500 from a single state in the U.S., which we haven't disclosed yet. And we have extrapolated what the total likely global dispersion is of all elements combined in this mix, which again is a very lethal array of toxic elements, somewhere between 40 to 60 million tons a year of nanoparticles being dispersed in the skies. And Mike, you saw the studies about mainstream media warning people of just how dangerous the smaller air pollution particles are from the fires, PM 2.5. You saw those articles, yeah. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So what people need to understand is they're not even looking for, let alone reporting or disclosing, the much more lethal particles that are much smaller than PM 2.5. And those are climate engineering elements, which are nanoparticles. So you have this mountain of even more toxic particles, of even more toxic elements being dispersed often directly above the smoke canopies. That's critical to understand. We have film footage of this, for example, of the Paradise Fire blanket, geoengineering jet aerosol spraying directly on top of the smoke bank. Whatever that's about, it's not benevolent. And we have also, so people understand, Mike, you've seen all the massive hail events of late.
Yeah.
Now it's common. Everything's 2-inch hailstones or bigger, doing tons, immense damage everywhere, right?
Yes, I've seen that. They've destroyed solar farms and greenhouses in many cases across America. Yeah, crazy, like almost baseball-size hail.
Yes, that's chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. Those are patented processes. People can see those patents at geoengineeringwatch.org. They can search the engineering winter section. So when you see these flash cool downs, when it goes from record highs of 115 or 20 and drops 50 degrees in hours, they are chemically seeding those clouds. Chemical ice nucleating elements causes the nucleation process to start much sooner at much higher temperatures, and you end up with massive hailstorms, and that's exactly what that's about. None of this being disclosed by the so-called science community.
And you know, the hail also just obliterates crops. And that's what people need to understand too. I mean, not just greenhouses, but crops on the ground, anything you're growing,
wipes them out.
Alfalfa, whatever, corn, it's done. Gets hit by a hailstorm and it's done. And
you're correct.
And so photosynthesis is being under attack with global dimming. Plus you just mentioned hail. Plus then you have floods and droughts. And, you know, instead of the weather, how it used to be, like when I was growing up, you always had a kind of a balance, kind of a mix. It would rain a little bit. It'd be sunny a little bit. You know, it'd get hot a few days in the summer, but not insane. You know, and you'd have, of course, snow in the winter. I grew up in the Midwest. So you'd have all this mix, but nothing got super crazy, at least that I recall, you know, growing up. And now it seems like it's crazy all the time everywhere. It's just the extremes have become the norm. And I mean, you're seeing that too, right? That you're documenting it.
The only ones that aren't seeing it, Mike, are those that have their eyes wide shut. And this is, again, they're telling us, they're forewarning us. It seems to be part of their protocol to expect it to get much, much worse. And we at geoengineeringwatch.org are not ignoring, again, the fact that we have been poor stewards of the planet. We are not ignoring that. We're not denying that. We never have. What we're saying is there's no legitimate discussion about climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost addressing this elephant in the equation, which is the most destructive single factor of all. We have to deal with this. We have to get it out in the open. We have to stop it. If we don't, we're on a very limited time frame. And as you so correctly stated a moment ago, the crushing of crops, flash hailstones, storms, flash freezes, flash droughts, flash floods. And this material is very cold to the touch, Mike. So we've seen, like in the late winter and early spring, when they allowed everything to bloom in California for about the 5th year in a row, and then they engineer a cool down over us and wipe out all the blooms, all the blossoms. And this material is so cold that it can flash freeze foliage at temperatures that would not be expected to see anything like this. It's extremely cold to the touch. And we have measured snow off the side of Mount Shasta that was the first snow of the year. This is several years ago. The ambient temperatures had not been below 30 degrees in that season yet, and the snow was 15 degrees. How does that happen? Snow sitting on the ground for 2 days was 15 degrees when the surface temperatures hadn't been below 30. That can only happen from chemical ice nucleation. And one more fallback to the pollinators, which you so correctly mentioned also a moment ago. I encourage your listeners to search bees aluminum, and they can find peer-reviewed study to prove that bees are dying of symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's and dementia in a human being because they are packed full of aluminum. They can't even find their way back to the hives, and no one is willing to talk about this. Why not?
Yeah, I've also seen some alarming reports of colony collapse of honeybees this year. I think, if I'm remembering, the number was in some areas 48% collapse in 1 year of honeybee populations.
You're correct, but what's confusing about that statistic is then people think that that's half of the total optimal amount that was here before. That's half of the percentage that was already greatly diminished. So it's
right. It's half of what we had left.
Half. Exactly. And we're not denying that there's other factors affecting the bees. And again, not denying that. Farm chemicals, glyphosate, frequency transmissions.
Neonics,
Yeah, we're not denying that. We're saying that there's a massive other factor here that's not being acknowledged. And on the frequency transmissions as well, we hope that people that are justly fighting against those transmissions and the dangers they pose will also incorporate the fact that we know some of those transmission towers have a service entrance, the service supply of power, that supplies 10 times more power than they need for communications. They are being used for climate intervention operations. We can see it on satellite radar. So we hope that those fighting the frequency transmissions also take into account that the transmissions being used for climate engineering are exponentially more powerful still. They need to be stopped also.
Good point. Yeah, really important point. Okay, let me ask you this question. For someone out there who is completely unaware of these topics, they don't watch you or me, and they don't look at alternative media at all. At what point does this become, at what point can they no longer ignore this because they go to the grocery store and there's almost nothing to eat, or they're so strongly impacted locally that they can't ignore this? I mean, because you and I know we're crossing a tipping point threshold right now on a planetary scale, and it's going to affect everyone, and it's going to kill a lot of people. But when do the oblivious have to face what's happening?
I will be personally very surprised if we reach the end of this year without extremely dire disruptions in our collective reality. In regard to tipping points, an example I've used often in our weekly broadcast, Global Alert News, that the human race is the occupants of the Thelma and Louise moment, the car flying through the guardrail, soaring through the air toward the bottom of the canyon, and the occupants clueless as to the severity of the situation. And that needs to change immediately. If we don't stop the current trajectory, we are not going to be here long. And that doesn't mean just 3 or 4 billion of us. That means all of us. We are on a trajectory that will soon make this planet completely uninhabitable. And climate engineering, again, the epitome of human insanity. Certainly not the only form, never said that. But Mike, we even have now high circles of power openly discussing the use of nuclear detonations to further mimic the temporary cooling effect of volcanoes, which again we know is toxic and very temporary, at which point in time it causes even more warming because you're trapping that heat as well. All these particles.
Who's talking about using nuclear detonations? What?
High circles of power in Washington are openly discussing that, using that a nuclear exchange would provide temporary cooling for the planet to slow down.
Gosh.
That's how far gone we are. If that
These
happens,
people are insane.
If that happens, we're done. We're done. The ionizing radiation would strip away what's left of the ozone layer. Game over. And that's the level of insanity we are now dealing with. So again, the gravity and immediacy of what's unfolding cannot be overstated. Whatever people are focused on, whatever their causes are, their concerns, none of it will matter when the entire ship goes down. We can't hide from what's happening in our skies. And if at any moment in time, and again, this is your wheelhouse, your arena, what I'm about to mention, but we already know that 2 of the elements being dispersed, polymer fibers and graphene are used militarily in biological warfare for biological carrier platforms. What's that mean? It means they can carry a biological element from the clouds to the ground, infect the populations below. As we've discussed, I think, in a previous broadcast, we have former DOD scientist Ken Caldera, who works for Bill Gates now. We have an audio of him stating that's what he did for the U.S. Department of Defense, design ways of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. What's to stop them, Mike, from spraying something much more lethal? We don't know what they're spraying now. Low-level elements to sicken populations, them, keep them struggling to try to make it day to day. But if they disperse hemorrhagic fever, Ebola, Marburg, we're done overnight. Done.
You're not kidding. And there's been a lot of research, of course, that has come to the surface about the bioweapons being pursued by the Department of Defense, including in the bioweapons laboratories in eastern Ukraine. And the Russians have now openly accused the United States of building biological weapons and genetic engineering of mosquitoes with the intent of dropping ethnic targeted bioweapons via mosquitoes onto Russia to kill Russians. And I don't think that Russia is fabricating that. I think that they have information and knowledge about the biolabs in Ukraine, and I think they're telling the truth because, I mean, look at the vaccines and the bioweapons that have already been deployed against us in America and whatever they're spraying in the skies and so on. It's like we're living in a kill zone. We're all being targeted right now through different means, whether it's mosquitoes or chemtrails or blocking the sun, stopping photosynthesis, mRNA injections, all of it. It's like they've pulled out every weapon that they possibly have all at once.
You're completely correct on all counts. And they're not, again, trying to reduce the population by half. They're trying to cut it down to, in their own stated dialogue, 500 million. That's a 7.5 billion reduction. And you're correct on all the different layers and means with which they're trying to do this. Of course, they're trying to cull populations. How obvious could that be at this point? And for those that are trying to tell themselves that the criminal cabals masquerading as legitimate governments are here to protect them, time to wake up. And on the Gates mosquitoes, isn't it interesting that after the release of so many millions, tens of millions of those in the U.S., now we have malaria showing up in places where it hasn't been for decades.
Yep.
Is that just a coincidence? We have the Lyme disease now wreaking havoc all over. And again, this is part of the many layers you just mentioned. When we know from, it's very well documented, the Plum Island lab where Lyme disease came from, that was a bioweapon being researched that
totally
is now
total bioweapons program. Yeah.
Yep. So again, as you so correctly stated, so many layers of this assault.
All right, let me remind people of your website, geoengineeringwatch.org. And Dane, I know our audience is very familiar with you, but walk our people through some of the things they can find on your website so they can take action here to try to raise the alarm and bring awareness to all of these issues.
In addition to starting with the best tool we have, the Deming documentary, again, we posted that for free the moment it was done. We spent a huge amount of resource, effort, and expense on that. But that's the one-stop tool to share with the link. We also have our printed materials, which we pass those on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. And having those, I know I sent those to you, Mike, our 20-page booklets, our cards, and that can be a real conversation starter. Along with our shirts, can start the conversation. People don't even know that this is going on in our skies. And once you open the conversation, you can get your foot in the door typically. And sharing a picture, again, our printed materials, pictures worth 1,000 words. So if we can start these spot fires of awareness in our own circles and have those who wake up do the same, and we expand this into bigger and bigger blazes until it can't be put out, till we can bring this issue to the full light of day. And if we can simply do that, so many wheels in this battle will turn on their own as people in high places realize they are fighting for their own lives as well. I'm communicating with individuals like former Senate Armed Services Committee members in D.C., people who are just waking up to the fact that this is going on and they are going to go down with the ship with the rest of us. Again, if we can reach that level of awareness where people in positions of power understand what they're participating in, we have a chance of stopping these programs from the inside out. That is the only way forward in this fight.
Well, talk to us about what that actually looks like, by the way. If we were to stop some of these programs, I mean, clearly there are a multitude of agencies and nations that are involved in this. So Walk us through. I mean, you'd have to get the DoD to stop all their stuff. You'd have to get the HARP operations. You'd have to get telecom. I mean, this is already so widespread. How would you even stop it if you wanted to?
Only with a global awareness. I would argue again, if populations all over the world realize we're forced to face, and that's the only way they seem willing to face it, they have to be forced to face it, that they are fighting for their lives right here, right now. Only by that level of awareness do we have a chance of buying time, turning the tide enough to buy time. When you cease these operations, there's a scientific scenario that has been coined for what happens then. It's called double catastrophe scenario. So all the pressure that's been built up in the system erupts. And I want people to understand that when you stop these operations, things just don't magically go back to normal. The damage done cannot be undone in any time frame that matters. Does that mean we give up? No, it doesn't mean that. It means if we can salvage any part of the planet's remaining life support systems and anyone can make it through what's coming, that's worth fighting for. And we must stop. The science community, Mike, tells us once you start climate engineering, you can never stop. Think how insane that is. That's telling the addict, once you start using, you can never stop. You only have to up your dose and up your dose and up your dose, and we all know where that ends. So the bottom line is, yep.
Well, wait a second. So if all the climate engineering and weather weaponization were to be halted right now, and sorry about my language, but how screwed are we already? I mean, things don't reverse instantly, as you just said. But if we stop things from getting worse, how bad is it going to be for the next few decades anyway?
I want to put this into a time frame based on all available paleo data that would indicate how long an equilibrium period would be after cessation of all human activity. Based on previous mass extinctions like the Pedum event, Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum 55 million years ago, an event not nearly as bad as what's happening now, that happened much slower than what's happening now. Literally what's happening now, hundreds of times faster than that event, which makes it hundreds of times worse. Equilibrium period after that event was about 10 to 20 million years.
What?
The planet,
oh my gosh.
The planet we've known is done. It's gone. But again, that doesn't mean we give up. If your example I've used before, if your child was in a burning house and you knew you had very little chance of saving your child, would you not run in and try? I know what the answer is for every parent. Of course they would. So the bottom line is, again, if we can salvage any part of the planet's remaining life support systems, we are obligated to try. And that is absolutely worth every fiber of our being in this battle. So again, we need to let go of what was. It's not coming back, short of some unforeseen intervention from some unknown source, but we could yet salvage some part of the planet's life support systems if we can stop these programs fast enough and other forms of human damage with it. But we must deal with this first because, Mike, even as I've stated at geoengineeringwatch.org so many times, the greatest and most immediate threat we face short of nuclear cataclysm is climate engineering. But now we have climate engineering also magnifying that threat, nuclear threat,
right,
because it's destroying the protective layers of the atmosphere. Now when we get a strong coronal mass ejection or solar flare, we now have nuclear plants shutting down around the globe, can't cool themselves, meltdowns everywhere, strips away the atmosphere with ionizing radiation, game over. And now we have the so-called science community just telling us a week ago that, oh, they made a mistake. The solar maximum isn't coming in 2025, it's coming this year. And that we should expect, quote, this is from mainstream source articles, we should expect internet shutdowns and power grid shutdowns this year from that. And we only have official sources in regard to the solar activity, so we have to just trust what they're saying. They can cause that type of event with the weaponry they already have being used in climate engineering, like ionosphere heaters. They can trigger what a CME type event with the frequency transmissions, Mike. Again, an EMP type.
You're saying
which would resemble an EMP event. Yeah.
So they could actually launch an EMP false flag type of event, take out the power grid, take out telecom, and just blame the sun.
Yep. Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Well, what a convenient scapegoat in the sky.
That's the whole scenario with climate engineering. That's why what's happening in our skies is the crown jewel weapon of those in power. because they can wreak havoc on populations and blame it on nature.
Right.
And that's why
exactly.
they're never going to let go of this weapon.
Yeah, right. They can never take the blame for the depopulation agenda. I mean, kind of like with COVID, they blame nature. They blame bats, like, oh, it was a bat virus, or they blame the food markets in China carrying the virus. I mean, they blame nature all the time.
Exactly. And we have the same thing now being told to us by the so-called Arctic scientists that say the thawing tundra is going to release all sorts of ancient pathogens all over the world. Again, blame it on nature. Don't pay any attention to the hundreds of biolabs all over the world that are engineering these pathogens. Let's just blame it on nature and pretend those biolabs don't exist. And the population needs to wake up to what's being done to them.
Now, you interviewed Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I see on your website. Was that a recent interview?
He actually interviewed me.
Oh, he interviewed you. Okay.
Interviewed me with Children's Health Defense.
Okay, great.
Yes, that's a recent exchange.
That's awesome.
And I'm grateful for RFK exchanging in this dialogue.
Yeah.
I hope that he continues to dive deeper, learn more, understand the gravity of the threat. Because again, if we don't stop what's happening in our skies, all other causes and concerns will be moot. This is comparable to arranging deck chairs on the Titanic with other causes that matter in and of themselves. But again, if the whole ship sinks, nothing else matters. And that is the gravity of what is happening in our skies and using our atmosphere for a physics lab. And Mike, how many people have asked you or regarded this issue as a form of their own denial? They say, why would they do this to themselves? You must have heard that many times.
Oh, yeah, sure. Right. Yeah, I have heard that.
And so we know how much they've already done to themselves. And I've cited before the 2,400 nuclear detonations. And let's take Project Starfish Prime as an example. The detonation of hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere that the so-called scientists of the time that were conducting this for the U.S. government felt that it could collapse the entire atmosphere. Did that stop them? No.
No.
It didn't stop them. They continued to do it. We're still dealing with the repercussions of what they did then. Today, we know the nuclear detonations in Nevada caused no less than 500,000 U.S. deaths as an indirect consequence of the downstream fallout from that. No one knows that.
Plus, they blasted the Bikini Islands with nukes. I mean, they built CERN. They could have created a planet-sucking black hole, and they went ahead with it anyway. These people are suicide cultists is part of the answer. But also, I think some of these globalists, they think that they're going to be insulated from this. They think that if they kill off enough of the common folk people, let's say, that then the planet will be restored to its lush green status so that the remaining surviving elites can enjoy the planet for themselves. But they're delusional in thinking that. I mean, the destruction they're unleashing is not going to restore, the Garden of Eden on planet Earth. It's quite the opposite.
You're completely correct. And the destruction of the formerly pristine South Sea Islands for nuclear games, just like kids in a sandbox. That's how they behave. They laid out all these battleships and blew them all up. They're like psychotic kids in a sandbox. Yeah. And in regard to their behavior, straight from psychoanalysis of those in power, there is a common trait in these people. And here's that trait. This is right from the manual. A near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. They are not sane. Public needs to wake up to that fact now.
Yeah, well said. I mean, they are sociopaths who are, I would say, part of a suicide cult. And the thing is that the sociopaths tend to rise to positions of power. And so they tend to run the militaries and the governments and the banks of the world, overall. And so we are on an incredible path of destruction. But I wanted to ask you, the reason I brought up Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is because he's one of the few people that you and I can both talk to who actually gets a lot of this about pollution and the threats to the planet and so on. And in fact, I wanted to ask you about, microplastics pollution, what that's doing to aquatic ecosystems, and then pesticide runoff in the waterways, and then pharmaceutical manufacturing waste that's being dumped in rivers and streams in in India and in places all over the world. We're talking about a chemical contamination of the oceans, the Gulf of Mexico, dead zones in the waters, the die-offs of coral reefs and so on. And this has nothing to do with the typical, CO2 climate change people. This is just straight up pollution, just polluting the whole freaking planet. And the environmentalists don't even pay attention to this stuff.
You're so completely correct. You're so completely correct. And if I could back up to confirm what you said a moment ago, that was also completely correct. Those who are running the matrix is those who print the money. When people say, who are they? All roads lead to those that control the money printers, as I know you know so well, and as you just stated a moment ago. That's where all roads to this insanity lead to. In regard to the total ubiquitous contamination of our planet, we live in a toxic fishbowl at this point. And again, to spray, willfully to spray 40 to 60 million tons of highly toxic nanoparticles in skies all over the world, virtually derailing all of the planet's life support systems. We know from peer-reviewed study now there's not an uncontaminated drop of rain on planet Earth. That's not my opinion. It's peer-reviewed study now that proves PFAS, forever chemicals, every single drop of rain. How much of that came from climate engineering, which is not acknowledged? Mike, I've had top EPA officials in Sacramento, the state capital here, closed-door meetings arranged by congressional reps, to my face state the entire system is rigged. We test for combustion particulates only PM10 in that case. Everything else, told in my face, everything else goes out the window. I was told the rain could be radioactive. We don't care.
No, I've had, Dane, I've had whistleblower Dr. David Lewis on, before I did a whole film with him called Biosludged. And he was a former EPA scientist. And when he started blowing the whistle on what was allowed to be dumped into the soils, because they take all the sewage and the feces from every city in America and they dump it into the soils. And it's everything. I mean, it's bioweapons, it's viruses, bacteria, it's, feminine hygiene products that are flushed down the toilets. It's used condoms and old pharmaceuticals and motor oil, everything you can imagine goes into that. And that gets put on the farms all across America and the school playgrounds and the grounds around hotels and government buildings. They're just, biosludge is spread everywhere. It's almost like a bioweapon assault. And what did the EPA do to Dr. David Lewis? Well, he was visited late at night by essentially men in black who pulled him out of his house and said they would kill him if he didn't shut up. And they took all his funding and they shut down his lab and they kicked him out. So, I mean, Dane, you're not the only one telling me this. I mean, the whistleblowers are real. This is happening again and again and again, spanning many years. This is a total assault. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm with you. Everything you said, completely correct. And if we look at even the fisheries, well, one example that I experienced firsthand, and I spent many years and countless hours alone diving at the Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California, 50 miles out to sea, what you are led to believe is still fairly pristine. This was in the late 80s and early 90s. I was subsisting off what I would gather from the ocean there while I was out at those islands alone. And I finally got a hold of a state biologist that then told me off the record, don't eat it anymore. This is in the, again, late 80s, early 90s. It's highly contaminated. And then we find out later, in fact, it was only discovered officially a year ago, something like that. There's 500,000 barrels of DDT dumped off the coast of LA, contaminating the entire channel. In fact, the scientist that found that, Mike, he hijacked a underwater remote vehicle because he had a hunch it was there. He said it looked like there were so many barrels of DDT. He said it looked like stars in the cosmos.
Oh my God.
500,000. They dumped them there. And I think I saw one of those barges dumping once when I was crossing in the middle of the night, full moon, saw a barge there, wondered what that could be. Now I think I know.
Yeah.
Again, think of the hubris with that. The government allowing them to dump 500,000 barrels of DDT in the water right off the coast of LA. And this is this is business as usual. We know that now. So we have nuclear dumping sites in places like Greenland and other locations that are thawing out quickly. Again, geoengineering making that worse, not better, trapping more heat than it deflects, fueling the warming of the planet. So now we have these nuke sites that are thawing all over these polar regions as well. So we face converging cataclysms at a level that few people are willing to try to comprehend.
And then there's dioxins on top of that, all the byproducts of PVC manufacturing and so on, and plastics. And then there was that famous case. Was it Pebble Beach, Missouri, where this company just took all this dioxin waste and mixed it with like road tar and then sprayed it as a dust, like to keep the dust down on the dirt roads over this entire town. And this stuff is toxic at not even parts per trillion, but I think a million times less than that. We're talking femtograms of dioxins can interfere with human physiology. And, by the way, did you see in Ohio, I think the governor just now declared some kind of emergency months after the big dioxin release happened that they denied, and now suddenly it's an emergency? I think that just happened today. It's like DeWine, I think, is the governor there.
That's him. And yes, it's they only reach that point when they can't put the lump under the rug any longer. And the gravity of, again, these synergistic toxins, and that's what people need to understand. All these elements, highly toxic in and of themselves, even if you look at the heavy metals, aluminum, barium, manganese, mercury. When we combine those elements, the toxicity goes exponential. And we know in the case of aluminum and mercury, how exponential it goes. The combination of those two already highly toxic metals, when combined, the overall toxicity skyrockets 10,000%. It's 100 times worse. It's a wonder any of us can walk and talk at this point.
So has anybody just told Bill Gates, hey, you don't need to do the mosquitoes and the vaccines anymore? The biosphere destruction is already going to depopulate the planet. I mean, Gates can back off at this point. I mean, the planet's already toast.
It is. In so many ways, we do need people to refocus their priorities, turn off the football game, forego the six-pack of beer, and help us carry this baton forward. If people love their children, if they want any future, any possibility of a future, they need to join this battle. It can't be done by a few on behalf of the many. It will take all of us. Yeah. And we are rapidly running out of time, Mike.
Well, that's a great wrap up for this interview. Folks, the website is geoengineeringwatch.org. And Dane, I can't say enough about your efforts. You've been fighting this very much for many years, very much alone. And I felt the same thing fighting pharma for many years. And now people realize, that what I was saying was true the whole time since 2003. And the same thing's true with you. They now see that what you've been saying for 20 years is also absolutely true. But, it might be too late for billions of people. That's the thing. You got to wake up in time, and we might be past that tipping point.
I would argue if a person takes their last breath knowing at their core that they were on the right path, that they had the right compass heading, and they were doing what's right because it's right, then the story ends well, no matter what. Yeah. And I would, again, augment people or ask people to keep that in mind. Please keep that in mind, that that's what matters. The journey is the destination. The destination is the journey. We are obligated to do what's right because it's right. That's incumbent upon us. And again, I salute all the years you've been in this battle. We march together in this fight now with so many other awakened aware people that are doing their best to do all they can from their individual circumstances. And they have my deepest regard. I'm immensely grateful to all those that have summoned the courage to face this gathering storm head on.
And with that thought, folks, geoengineeringwatch.org is the website, and you can also donate to Geoengineering Watch. We have donated, and we encourage you to consider that as well. There's the donate button right there. And Dane, let me ask one last question. Are you seeing more traction with your message among people over the last few years?
Yes, and we have, with some of the help we have received, we are currently funding 23 on-air AM/FM stations all over the country no commercials, no politics, to try and get the word out. So we put any resource we get to the road. Rubber hits the road with that, and we will continue to do that. This is my mission in life. I will definitely continue to stay at my post until my last breath, but we are absolutely seeing a wake-up occurring, Mike. I interviewed with a large South American newspaper recently, Las Prisas, that reached a great deal of the non-choir in South America. I just interviewed with Italian TV, done several big sources in Europe. That there's definitely a major wake-up beginning to occur, and I would argue because of unfolding circumstances, because of the level of weather warfare being waged at this moment, they can't hide this much longer. So now is the time when we need everybody at their post to help us force this issue to light. Again, if we could bring this to light, so many wheels in this battle would turn on their own. We would cause a shockwave around the world. As dark as the horizon is, if we can do that, it would still be a quantum leap in the right direction.
Yeah, well said. All right, well, that's where we're going to wrap it up today, Dane. Again, always an honor to speak with you, and thank you for joining us today. And God bless you for all your work to do what you can to save humanity and our planet both together. You know, we can't exist separately. We all need each other. But thank you for joining me today.
Team effort, Mike. Same gratitude right back to you. Let's continue to march forward in this battle.
All right, we shall. And those of you watching, you can help by sharing this video. And currently, the Brighteon.com links are not shareable on Twitter or Facebook, but we also post this on Rumble. And Rumble links are currently shareable even for the exact same video, which is interesting. But we do post on Rumble and BitChute and other platforms. And you can repost this interview also on your own channels and other platforms. And spread the word in every way you can. And check out geoengineeringwatch.org. Consider some financial support if you can help Dane with his efforts. Dane is a true warrior and a champion for all life on our planet. And I in my heart, I really share that mission with him to protect life on our planet, which includes humans, animals, plants, the entire biosphere. I value all forms of life on our planet, including human life, by the way. And that's something that the globalists do not share with us as they're trying to exterminate so much. But anyway, thank you for watching today. I'm Mike Adams, the founder of Brighteon.com, and we've been talking with Dane Wigington from Geoengineering Watch. Take care, everybody. Hope you enjoyed today's interview. It's brought to you by my online store, healthrangerstore.com. And if you're looking for some food storage that is lab tested and certified organic, then there's really no better choice anywhere out there. We've got a number of items in stock right now. I've got some on my desk. We've got Ranger buckets here, which is a 2-bucket set. Actually, I'm only showing 1 bucket right now, but it's a 2-bucket set. And we've got number 10 cans, which is, you see the peas there. And we do whirl them around a little bit, so they're actually whirled peas. And we've also got cans of blueberries and mangoes, of freeze-dried, certified organic, lab-tested fruit and vegetables in this long-term storage format with the number 10 cans. And then you see we have hard red wheat berries, also, of course, certified organic, lab-tested, all of that. And we've got lots of buckets of those available, so you can stockpile wheat berries that have a very long storage life. And then if you go to our website, check this out. Here's, for example, organic milk powder. Oops, there it is. And that's also lab tested, certified organic. And we've got, of course, supplements and superfoods and detox foot pads and so much more. So check it all out at healthrangerstore.com. And remember that every purchase also helps support this show and this platform so that we can actually tell the truth about things that matter. But definitely get prepared. I encourage you to take up some food production, some home gardening, some sprouting. Do what you can to grow some food and also stock up on food through reputable sources such as our store, healthrangerstore.com. Thank you for your support. A global reset is coming, and that's why I've recorded a new 9-hour audiobook. It's called The Global Reset Survival Guide. You can download it for free by subscribing to the naturalnews.com email newsletter, which is also free. I'll describe how the monetary system fails. I also cover emergency medicine and first aid and what to buy to help you avoid infections. So download this guide. It's free. It's my gift to you simply because I want like-minded people to survive.